it's not going to be a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how. It's going to be becoming a part of your life. So it's going to be, how do we make that more efficient? How do we not see it as the enemy? But how do we understand it and know when we can get value out of it and when we can't?
Welcome to The Future Of, a podcast by Fresh Consulting, where we discuss and learn about the future of different industries, markets, and technology verticals. Together, we'll chat with leaders and experts in the field and discuss how we can shape the future human experience. I'm your host, Jeff Dance. In this episode of The Future Of, we're joined by Brooke Quist, partner at Seed IP, and Michael Wiggins, Chief Legal Officer here at Fresh Consulting, to explore the future of AI and IP, meaning intellectual property. As by way of intro, I want to give some quick intros and then ask the guests here for kind of their experience getting into the IP and law space. But grateful to have you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Good stuff. By way of intro, Brooke has been an attorney for almost 30 years. He's currently a partner at Seed IP. He counsels the clients on intellectual property matters and portfolio development, including patent, trademark, and copyright law. He lives in the Seattle area with his family. He has a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Texas School of Law, also an engineering degree from the University of Southern California. He's also done some coursework from UC Berkeley on generative AI for as we think about the topic of today. Michael Wiggins, like I mentioned, he's currently the Chief Legal Officer here at Fresh, and a great one at that. He's worked with us for over 10 years, full-time and prior, probably even longer than that, part-time advising and counseling us. And then he's also, 10 years prior to that, he was running his own firm with a couple other partners and saw a lot of, things as a legal professional, including intellectual property. He's a graduate of Seattle University's law program, also lives in the Seattle area with his family. Here at Fresh, he's done a lot of M&A work and looked at technology kind of investment areas that have involved intellectual property. He's built some great frameworks that have supported our growth and, done that trying to balance, both risks and opportunities. So he's been great to have on our team. Excited to have both of you guys here for this topic, this really important topic, given how fast AI is changing things. Brooke, before we kind of get into the topic, I'm interested, what drew you to intellectual property and portfolio development specifically?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. A lot of patent attorneys kind of stumble into it. It's a little bit of an obscure area of the law. But I actually had a little bit of more serendipity to it with me. My father had a PhD in metallurgical engineering and worked for Boeing for 35 years. And he actually had a couple dozen patents that were on the wings of Boeing's planes, the 07, 27, 37, 47, 57, and 67. And so I was meeting patent attorneys at 11 or 12 years old as my dad was going to testify in different hearings and so forth. And it was actually even a really big case that Boeing had against the U.S. government that was based on one of the patents that my dad wrote. So I had a real sort of early awakening to the field. But then I decided to go back into kind of follow the family footsteps and go into engineering. And I worked for Northrop Grumman now currently, and worked on the F-18 and the B-2 bomber and a few other really interesting projects there. But then in the great aerospace downturn of the early 90s, the profession forecast was not looking as good. So I made a pivot back into patent law and had kept in contact with that, had done some summer interns with patent law firms throughout the way. So it was kind of an interesting background, and the late 90s when I came out is really when patent law started taking off, and it was sort of fortuitous timing.
Great background. It's I would say very powerful combination to have kind of that depth of engineering and add to that the law experience. So Michael, you had a similar sort of journey, right? You had a undergrad in molecular biology and biochemistry from UW, but you ended up in law. Like, how to tell us more about your journey there?
Sure. I started my college career thinking I was going to go into medical science, biotechnology, pharmaceutics. Got towards the end of college, did an internship at a small med tech company, biopharmaceutical company in Seattle, and was there long enough to realize that I didn't want to do that as a strict science technology approach. So I pivoted to law school, and then I sat for the bar after I graduated with my law degree and took the patent bar and passed it. And then just have since then been able to kind of sit on the confluence of policy and law and IP, but not the strict practice as Brooke does.
Thanks for that background. Well, let's dive right into the future of AI and intellectual property. I want to talk a little bit first about the current landscape and then kind of shift towards the future with its opportunities and challenges. The International Bar Association and the Center for AI and Digital Policy recently found that 100% of larger firms, from like 500 plus lawyers surveyed, reported using AI in their operations. If that's true, and that's a general, I know 500 is a decent sample size. How are you guys both using AI in your legal work, or how do you plan to use it?
I'd be really curious to know the people who are answering, like, are they using it to help sort resumes that are coming in, or are they using it to help build their HR portfolio? Like, for example, I have a friend at a small tech company, and they have uploaded all of their HR materials into an AI local platform so that people can just ask questions about how some AR related issue would be answered, and they can respond to that. The bigger question I think would be, are they actually using AI in their legal practice, like in the creation of documents or the editing of documents or the drafting of, new applications of one type or another? And that gets into, a much more interesting and potentially concerning area. As attorneys, we all tend to be a little bit more conservative, and we're worried about things like confidentiality, and there's always some concern about when you're using an AI platform, is information that you're putting in being used in the platform to further its iterations. A lot of companies now, AI companies that is, have toggles where you can determine whether that information wants to go in or not. But I think probably a lot of law firms are not totally comfortable with that. At the same time, I'll say that when email first came out, a lot of firms were not comfortable sending legal documents by email either. So that may be something that evolves over time as comfortableness grows. I can tell you that we are actively looking at any opportunities that we can use AI to either produce a better product for our clients or to do it more efficiently. But we haven't felt like there's been the real breakthrough yet that's going to take it to the next level. And I think we're going to get into some of these issues as we go further on. But basically, for real creative type of work, I don't think AI is quite there yet. But for more, summaries of unstructured data, I think AI is great at that. So if you pick its strength, I think there's definitely places for it. But a lot of at least the more advanced legal work requires that sort of creative fine touch that I don't think we've reached yet.
Okay, Michael.
Yeah, I really appreciate Brooks's perspective on it, because being in house, I have budget that I contend with, right? So I'm not an hourly biller. I have one client. And so I'm in, as the common conversation goes around in-house in kind of legal function, I have to do a lot with a little. And that's across the board. That's not a representation of Fresh at all. It's just how in-house counsel function works from a resourcing perspective. So I have the benefit of having the legal background, so I can go pretty deep. I can use AI fairly broadly recognizing that I have the catches, I have the background information, the background knowledge to where I may not know an exact answer, but I can see when something may not be aligned, or it may be a hallucination from the AI. And so I can catch those things. So people in my position are very excited about it. I think because it's going to allow us to do more with less. Now, I would say that's the first part of it. The second part is it really allows me to fine tune my relationship, for instance, with Brooke, because my job as in-house counsel and chief legal officer, general counsel, is I manage our external legal function and our external legal teams. And so if I can be better at what I'm doing and I can be more educated on the inside, I can at least ask sharper, better questions to our outside counsel. And that's always one of the pushes and pulls of external legal, internal legal, is I'm watching a budget. And so I'm always very conscious of what our external legal partners are working on. And so I think AI helps me do that better through a number of different avenues, for sure.
What are you seeing as strengths and weaknesses in kind of the current state, like where it's most useful, Michael? And then interest in Brooke's opinion as well.
Yeah. I would say in those areas of my role where it's really legal focused and not, it's a little less business, more legal compliance. I would say that Brooke kind of hit it on the head, as you can sort of amalgamate, climb through, and digest and process large unstructured data sets. That seems to be the biggest lift, and that's always been a huge lift, made so much easier. I would say that that's the biggest strength. In the legal function, though, I wouldn't say I use it in a creative sense. To Brooke's point, I would say as my role shifts more into the business, into M&A, into investment, looking more at from a trends perspective versus like, am I dotting the right I's, am I crossing the right T's? I would say that it's actually quite helpful there, in terms of content creation, and moving important matters forward.
Got it. Brooke, what about you?
Yeah. So I'll answer both sort of in a hypothetical sense and in a more practical sense. In the practical sense, I think that that it is probably more useful right now for people that are a little bit more senior, because as Michael said, you can quickly recognize when AI goes astray, makes a mistake, which it does frequently. Um, but you can benefit from the kind of brainstorming that it can do for you. Like, for example, if you've got a contract and you've written 15 provisions, and you want to know if you should add any, an AI platform can give you 10 more suggestions, and 8 of them might be terrible, but 2 of them are really good, and then you can incorporate those. But if you're a younger tech worker or a younger attorney, and you don't have that skill set yet to be able to quickly distinguish between what's a good suggestion and a bad suggestion, that is, that's going to be more problematic. And if you're relying on it when you don't have that background, that could get you into trouble. Looking kind of at, I don't know if this is quite the future, but at different applications that are potential, like, for example, I would think for a company like yours, you could build up a database of contracts that you had done in the past with different vendors. And then if a new vendor sent you a new contract that they had written, you could ask AI to quickly compare those and look for key differences from what had been done before. So if this was a 40-page contract, you might be able to quickly, find 4 or 5 significant changes that they had made from the norm. So something like that could be really powerful when you've got that data already built up, so you can use it to take advantage of it.
That if I could add on that, Joe, I think that's kind of one of the key points is if you have already a robust data set to pull from, I think it's quite valuable. I think a lot of my understanding right now is there's a lot of, and they typically are smaller, maybe medium-sized law firms. They're wanting to go out and mine data that's outside of their proprietary information, and it's not yielding the benefits, right? So they treat, I think a lot of times they treat AI as sort of just an enhanced Google search. And so they're putting contracts and say, hey, take a look at this and tell me if this is okay. Well, okay is sort of a contextual relative term. So those, as always, the people who have the data are still leveraging this, I think, a lot better, which is one of the strengths. So I think your question is a good question, but I think it's a relative question in terms of like where are you getting your data to like run
Right.
that AI.
If you have all the contracts that have been written by your company, that's a nice data set to pull from, right? And say, hey, I've compressed this knowledge. I can pull from this, and so kind of I think they're relative to what you have or what you're working with, and how that's structured is an important one as we contemplate the use of the strengths and weaknesses of AI. If we get into intellectual property here, Brooke, you're at the forefront, right, of kind of see this unfold. How is AI kind of impacting intellectual property? And maybe for the audience that is newer, if you can just kind of give us that definition of intellectual property from your vantage, and then kind of help us understand how generative AI is sort of impacting IP today. I'd be really interested in your insights.
Yeah. So when we say intellectual property, people probably most commonly, think of patent law, copyright law, trademark law, and trade secret law, a few other related things, name, image, likeness, those types of things. But when it comes to AI, probably the main things that we're going to be thinking of is patents and copyrights. And we'll talk a little bit more about patents, I think, in a minute. But let's start with copyrights, because that's where it sort of hit the news first. And that's because a lot of these large data models were basically being trained on the internet. They basically went out and said, okay, one thing we haven't talked about yet is whether your AI platform is sort of proprietary, whether you're building it on your own company's data structures, or whether it's going out and looking at third-party data. And there's advantages to using third-party data because there's more of it. The more information you can use, the bigger the data set, the more you can build things out. The danger, the problems are, one, you don't know if it's good data or bad data, and it's the old garbage in, garbage out, quality in, quality out. But then also the issue is, what if you're training it on data, and you are, that's been copyrighted by other people, and that's been sort of the first area that AI has been hitting the courts. And I think that is one thing that is, scared a lot of more conservative people who thought that, there's going to be all sorts of copyright infringement issues that come from this. We're just starting to see the first cases come down on this. In fact, I think I just saw like the second decision come down a week or so ago that involved Meta. And those have been favoring the side of the AI companies, where they've been saying that the AI is what's called transformative use, which for our purposes will mean non-infringing use, and that it's also fair use. In copyright, there's the main exception from infringement is this broad category of fair use. And the first case that came down was a district court case in California. And the judge there said that feeding copyright material to train AI was equivalent to training school children to write well. So if that trend continues, that's going to be really good for the AI platforms and the tech companies in general. It's not clear yet if that's going to be the case. One of the judge in this new case that just came down kind of had a hint in what was probably dicta, probably the non-holding of the case, that if they had instead argued market dilution instead of copyright infringement, that the AI was going to dilute their works because it could rapidly reproduce these works so quickly in the marketplace, that the case might have gone the other way if it was a market dilution argument and not a copyright argument. So that's what we're seeing so far in the copyright space, is it may be leaning in the direction of the AI companies. And that's certainly what they're all banking on. They're banking that this is just kind of a little blip in the pan, and they're going to kind of steamroll through this. In the the patent side, it's a little bit more of a long-term issue because we're not talking about so much cases that are going to court right away. We're talking about how applications are working their way through the patent office. And we can look at that in a few different ways. And I'll let you sort of pick which trail you want to run down. But, one of those issues is, can the AI be considered an inventor? And, the short answer to that is no from the patent office so far, but there's a lot of ramifications of that. Another issue is, one issue that can come up in software sometimes is what they call patent eligibility. Is the subject matter eligible to be patented? And while in general the patent office has been leading us to believe that AI is going to be patentable, and in fact, I've had several successful cases with patents before the patent office. There was also a case that just came down that the holding at least was not positive, where the court found that the AI was not patent eligible and it was rejected. Now, if you dig into the holding a little bit more, and you could argue that I'm a little bit biased in this because I want to see good things for patents and AI, but it looks like the judges were going out of their way to say, we do think that that patents in AI will occur, just not this patent. This patent, they're basically saying if you just take a generic field of use and limit it to AI, that's not going to be enough to be patent eligible. If you just say, I am going to be doing this type of strategy, so in this case, they were talking about a particular technological improvement, and they just said, we're going to do this with iterative training, and that's going to be kind of the fundamental premise of AI, is that you're just going to keep learning and retraining. That's not going to be enough. You need to tell us more about, why it's different, what the advantages are here. If it's something, this is a good rule to think about. If it's something that you're just taking something that was done before by humans and you're automating it, that's not going to be sufficient for patentability. So we think, every patent attorney out there has been, slicing and dicing this opinion, trying to glean strategies to take away, but we think we have good strategies for going forward. And I'd be happy to talk about those in more detail if you'd like.
It's fascinating, as you truly understand AI and sort of that black box nature of like not exactly tracing how some of this stuff comes out, and the brain-like aspects, the hallucinations, the creativity we see just in imagery alone.
Yeah.
Where there's interpretation, but there's some novel aspects of it. I can see where this is really hard to decipher. Michael, what are your thoughts on kind of AI and how it's impacting intellectual property?
Yeah, I really like Brooks's explanation. I would agree with that. I think for me, just kind of being more towards the business side of the issue, I think about like where's value being created based upon how this works. I think the patentability issue is going to hit certain industries a lot differently than others, and take pharmaceuticals for instance, where these companies invest hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of years to produce a certain pharmaceutical product, and that R&D pipeline is going to be rapidly, exponentially moved forward. And so the speed of it's just going to happen like nothing we've ever seen before. And so what does that mean in terms of their ability to get patents on pharmaceutics? Well, these cases are going to have a huge impact on the value these companies are going to create or not be able to create through these pipelines, through these R&D pipelines. And so there's certainly other industries that would be analogous to that. I think for everybody else, the patentability issue is interesting, but I think one question I often get is, how should I use AI? Do I need to go out, to Brooke's point earlier in the conversation, do I need to go out and spend $10 million or $20 million on an LLM for my company? Well, the reality is for most companies, AI is just going to be used to do what they do better. It's not the product. It's the way that they're going to deliver their product, account for their product, whatever. And so I think patentability is going to matter specifically in certain industries. It's not going to matter as much in others. Speed and the go-to-market is still going to be the most important aspect. But I do think that unlike copyright, I think we're going to have to see some statutory changes. And I think, and I don't know where Brooke sits on that, but I think my view is, you look at some of the things that have happened recently. I don't know if you two heard, but President Trump just went in front of the Supreme Court, and people who aren't in jurisprudence don't really understand the import of this, I don't think. But there's been a Supreme Court ruling now that has said, hey, federal judges are going to be a lot more hamstringed in terms of issuing like nationwide injunctions on certain areas of law. Now, so, Brooke brings up a copyright case in the Ninth Circuit, and someone else brings one up in the Fourth Circuit. Those district judges are going to be kind of restricted. And so you're going to see a lot more, if this plays out the way I think it is, you're going to see a lot more conflicting jurisprudence come out of these issues. And so my take is that the Congress, state legislatures, international groups are going to have to figure out how to harmonize these statutes across the different jurisdictions, or there's just going to be a huge patchwork. And so I think there's just going to be it's a lot up in the air right now.
Yeah. There's even another factor there with patent law, and that's that the patent office is not always in alignment with the courts as to what's patent eligible. So you can have, things being granted as patent eligible by the patent office that are then knocked down by the courts, because the courts are very clear that they don't look to the patent office for their guidance. They have their own jurisprudence that they look to. So sometimes it's a two-step process. We like to think that everything is perfectly aligned, but in reality, that's not the case.
Right.
I mean, overall, it sounds like we're entering a domain where new legal standards are going to be needed to protect both the creators and the innovators.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure. I think one of the fascinating things, Jeff, is the whole concept of AI and like how do you regulate it and those regulatory frameworks and compliance frameworks. And I think Brooke, you and I have had a conversation on this before, but do we give AI kind of a persona, like legal persona, which isn't new to the to our rule of law in this country? Like we give corporations quasi persona rights, and so a company can own property, and a company can own assets, and a company can sue or be sued. Those are very individual rights, and so the question is, like, as you think about patentability on the authorship issue, to Brooke's earlier point, can an AI actually be an inventor? Well, that you could say yes, you could say no, and a lot of people are saying, well, never, because they're not people, and that's where patent ingenuity comes from. Well, no, we've done that in the past. So I think there are existing frameworks that will support some of this, but I think some of it's going to have to be net new in order to keep up with how fast this and how deep this AI goes into transforming the way our society thinks about this stuff.
That's interesting. I mean, it's clear that generative AI can generate something new. And sometimes we hear a lot about hallucinations. I'm like, don't we hallucinate a lot as humans too? Because it seems like that's a very human-like thing. Yeah. Just open up, social media, and you can see lots of unique, differing viewpoints, right?
And then the lawyers get involved.
Yeah. The thing is, though, when we hallucinate, usually we reread what we wrote, and we go, oh, that's no good. And the problem is some people are using AI and they're not looking at it before they send it out somewhere. And so their hallucinations get incorporated in the final product.
Right.
So if we have the appropriate checks and balances in place, those get caught. And interestingly, those hallucinations come the most when we're trying to make the AI more human, when we're trying to crank up the creativity. That's when the hallucinations happen the most. When we dial back the creativity, then they happen less.
Which a lot of people don't understand, that there's actually a sort of a sensitivity, anything from a RAG search, which is just intelligence using existing information, only using existing information, but maybe put together, intelligence over knowledge. And then another side, which is like, no, I'm truly using these different inputs, and I'm coming up with new concepts, essentially.
Yeah.
So if you're building something of your own, obviously you can dial that creativity in either direction. When we develop things, you can say, well, I want this to be more like a RAG search, more like a search, and then over here I can be like, no, I want like full creativity, and I want it's a lot of extrapolation. I'm curious, Brooke, for you, like, as companies think about developing their own AI, and it sounded like you guys are in that mode as well, thinking about how do you leverage it. Do you have any guidance for or considerations for companies between developing their own AI platforms and using third-party AI solutions? Any thoughts there? I know it's a big question.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. I mean, if you can develop your own internal program, that's always going to be the best. Because, like, for example, let's say my firm writes patents in a particular area of pharmacology. If we have written thousands of patents in that area, and we can use all of our own patents that we are very happy with the quality of those to train our system to do whatever it's going to do, assist us in drafting some part of the application, or review applications that we've drafted for things that look like they've, are not the norm. We know it's going to match our standards. But if we go to something external, then, by definition, we're using, other people's information, and we can get a bigger data set, but we may not like the data we're including, and it's going to be very difficult to ascertain that. One thing that's happening more and more is that we're getting what some people are calling sandboxed versions of AI. So you're getting something that's built to a certain level, and then you bring it in-house, you put it inside your firewall, and then you can modify it from there. Then you can add your own things to there. You can add your own, sometimes your own software functions, sometimes just your training data, but then you're creating something that is your own from something that was, built by someone else. So you're trying to get the best of both worlds. You're trying to get that more broad-based, but then you're trying to bring it in-house so you don't have the confidentiality issues, and you can also augment the training with your own material, and obviously probably try and prioritize your own material and what's being done. So that's a more ideal scenario. It depends obviously on the size of your company. When I talk to a friend of mine who's at, any of the big tech companies, a Meta or an Apple or a Microsoft or whatever, and, you'll have conversations about something you've seen on like a Chat GPT or something, and they will say something like, oh, we're not allowed to use that, but we have our own system. They can do that, and the, what it costs them compared to the value of the company is quite small. If you're a startup, you're not going to be able to do that. So you're going to be more, forced, if you want to be in the AI game, to use a third party platform to some degree to get some leverage. And if you're using it in the right way, taking the necessary precautions, dealing with any confidentiality issues, if they exist in your area. And by the way, that's something that is I don't know, it's uniquely U.S., but it's more U.S. When you talk to some people at international conferences from some other countries, they're like, what do you mean confidentiality? Our government sees everything. So
yeah.
So it depends where you are in the world as well.
Yes. I was speaking to a business owner who got acquired by a foreign entity, and just like the different cultural backgrounds, like, for generations, some people have had like, oh, this is intellectual property is just, it's commonly owned, and so it's just a completely different mindset. So that's interesting to hear that. Yeah, obviously with AI, that people are going to have different perspectives on it as well. that's good to remind ourselves that there's a continuum, as far as like, okay, it's not just one or the other, complete proprietary versus complete third party. There isn't a strong in between, which can be, hey, you're bringing your proprietary reviews or other agentic sort of agents in sequence that give you that, make it you, or hey, you're underneath, you're bringing just your own knowledge, even though maybe you have a third party system on top that you're not accessing the world's information. There's a lot of flexibilities we think about trying to fit what would best fit a company and kind of their the efficiency they want, but also considering the risks that they have as well.
Yeah, and we think about it from our client's perspective as well. I mean, we want them to know that we're bringing them value that other people can't. That they're getting something from us as true value added from our competitors, and not just the same thing that an AI is going to produce. But at the same time, we want to give them the most efficient, cost-effective product. So you don't want to turn a blind eye to technology that is going to make you more expensive than everyone else. So you got to get the right balance of being able to leverage technology and use it in a cost-effective manner, but not strip out what gives your service, whether it's legal or something else, value.
Thank you, Michael. For you, 38% of employees acknowledge sharing sensitive information with AI tools without permission, and that obviously includes intellectual property, source code, regulated data, IP, passwords. People don't realize that they've shared they're indexing maybe some of their folders. So this is very common that people are sharing sensitive data. And we call that shadow AI. It's the rise of unauthorized employee AI use. Maybe when we surveyed that survey of 500 lawyers, the parent companies that didn't know, but everyone was like, yeah, we're using it.
Right.
But how can companies kind of manage shadow AI and ensure their data doesn't flow back into these larger data training sets?
Well, I think the first one goes back to, I think, Brooke's response was, hey, build your own, right? If you have the ability to build your own, then you're necessarily barricading those outer reaches where put whatever you want as long as it stays within sort of the entity's proprietary corral. I think for those companies that are leveraging off the shelf, out of the box AIs to run internal processes, I think there's technology solutions to that, right? Because you can toggle in terms of like giving the whole engine access to all the information to learn it or to grow it. You have to look at the licenses. I mean, you have to look at the tools that you're bringing in from a company perspective to say, hey, what rights am I giving up, and what rights do I have to this IP that I'm using that I'm kind of running through this AI? And so I think that's where you start from a technical legal perspective. There's a lot of conversation on the soft side around governance right now. And that's kind of a squishy word in every way that it's used. Like, what does governance mean? I think having policies in place certainly matters a lot. Like, these things, they should make their way into your employee handbooks. Your SOPs, standard operating procedures. Those need to be in there, and there needs to have a little bit of teeth to them. When I say teeth, I'm not talking about like, hey, if you put something into a chat GPT and it goes out in the ethersphere, you're somehow jobs at risk. Although for repeat offenders, maybe that might be something your company has to do depending on what business your company's in. So I think thinking about those policies, training your employees, I think the onus, though, is on the employer. The onus is on the company, because I think there's still a bit of a mixed message out there about, hey, we want to run really hard at AI and use it, and we want to make everybody more efficient and productive. At the same time, don't use it. Be careful with it. It's scary. And so I think employees are getting kind of caught in this mixed message. And so if you put employees in that position, they're going to go they're going to try and fulfill the mandate of what the company is telling them, what their employer is telling them, but they're not going to do it in a very structured way.
Mm-hmm.
So from my perspective, companies need to lean into this,
Right.
whether they understand it or not. They need to lean into this, and they're given the keys to the car to the kids, so to speak. They actually need to teach them to drive it, and take that mentality with it. But that's starting at the executive level at companies. The reality is, like, this is here to stay, and Brooke will say this every chance he can, is like, this is going to happen. How far, how fast, how hard it happens remains to be seen, but it's going to happen. So I think companies need to get comfortable with it, and then they need to empower their employees to actually leverage the technology, and then they have to have their IT departments come in and support and scaffold that. And I think if they can do that, employees are going to be less kind of, well, do I do it? Do I not do it? And if I'm kind of hesitant, then I'm going to mess it up. I think that's probably the biggest thing. But start with start with the contracts, start with the technology solutions, and then work backwards from there to the people, and make sure that the people have a good appetite for it.
Thanks for those holistic thoughts. Brooke, can you elaborate further as we think about, like, this is going to happen? It is happening. We can't stop it. Like, when we talk about the future, like, what are we envisioning? What are your thoughts, especially as it relates to intellectual property?
Yeah, and going back for just a second to that statistic you had about people sharing sensitive data, I'd be really curious to dig into that and know if it was unintentional, or trying to do the best thing for the company, or if it was more nefarious, because those can be different things.
Right.
And you can do things like blocking websites the same way you block social media, or Facebook or whatever. You can block Chat GPT or whatever if your company doesn't want access to that. But your company may want access to that. You probably, depending on what vertical you're in and what exactly you're doing, you probably want to leverage AI, and the better it gets, the probably more you're going to want to leverage it. But you're going to want to have rules about how it can be used and how it cannot be used. Right. And in some of these things about sensitive data, it can be an issue of training. My firm, and I'm sure lots of companies, legal and otherwise, go through security training now, so people don't compromise their system to security threats. We may need training like that for AI, and what you can do and what you can't do. Like, I heard one anecdote about a professional, not someone I worked with personally, but who knew that they were a little gruff, a little mean, a little terse in how they interacted with people, written and otherwise. So they had an AI program that would tone down and soften, take the rough edges off what they put together. So that sounds great, and that could be good. But if that is a third party program and you're putting confidential information into that, you could be, creating security issues. And that person wasn't trying to create security issues. But as Michael said, this is going to need to be in probably all employee manuals going forward. And that's probably not far enough. You're probably going to need training. Me and my firm has already been involved in, agreements for companies that specifically are dealing with AI issues, and they want to have exact parameters over how it can be used and how it can't be used. What can be brought to the table to assist, and how can they ensure that they're getting the benefit of the AI, but not the dangers of AI.
Yeah. I think at a minimum, companies need to have a business account, right? that has committed to not training the larger models, right? It's like, it's just so easy and it's free that people, without providing that, like providing a company account, it's like people are going to do it anyway. And they don't have the same mindset.
Right.
And so I think at a minimum, getting a business account is is a foundational thing. But everything else you guys have said makes perfect sense. Yeah. What about the future, Brooke? As we think about the future and where things are trending, any overall thoughts as we look ahead?
Well, as we sort of tipped on, it's not going to be a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how. So AI is going to be, for most professions, it's going to be becoming a part of your life. So it's going to be, how do we make that more efficient? How do we not see it as the enemy? But how do we understand it and know when we can get value out of it and when we can't? And then the trick is that's going to be a changing set point, because as the AI gets better, then we can rely on it more. And sort of having that skill to know, when we can rely on it and when we can't, that's going to be the trick. One issue is going to be I know this will come into law and it'll come into probably a lot of areas of technology, but we'll get to the point in your industry, if we're not there already, where some of what can be done by junior employees can be done by AI. So as we want to leverage that, we want to get the best value for our clients. We want to, take advantage of those tools. But if you stop hiring young people to do that work, then those young people can't become, mid-tier people and senior people. You've got to have people in the pipeline to come through that. So there's going to be some questions of, how do we get enough good people through so that we're getting them to the more senior tasks that can't be done by AI, at least not yet. And how do we balance that? So that's going to be one issue. How do we train the new people not to rely on AI? Because the younger people coming up are always going to be more technical in nature, because it's what they saw from the get-go.
Yep.
They
were born with it.
Yeah,
they were born into that environment.
Smartphones for whatever it is. So it's going to become just obvious to them to just, whenever they have a question, just ask their AI bot, the same way people do a Siri or whatever. So how do we keep them from breaking rules that they don't think of as rules? They think of as the way they just live their life up until now. So as we said before, that's going to take training. That's going to take, getting in there and really talking to these kids about, what the dangers are and what their dangers are. And some of that, is going to be, like I said, just like, network security, just training people what it makes sense to do, what's safe to do with Wi-Fi and not safe to do with Wi-Fi, what's safe to do with, the USB thumb drive, and what's not safe to do. So it is a tool, and we're going to be using it more and more, and we need to just find and educate ourselves on the proper way to do it. And for some industries, it's going to be tougher because, some areas may get pushed out. The CEO of NVIDIA a while back said that, he thinks, and I'm paraphrasing here, said he thinks, software coding is going to be, near gone in, 5 years. And if he had a kid, he wouldn't have them do that. That probably is a little over exaggeration. But, AI bots are really good at coding. So, and if you look at, some other area that, where you're reading large documents of data, like think maybe, reading an X-ray or reading an MRI or something like that, where you can train a model on, just huge quantities of data. And then, you probably bring in, your skilled doctor at the end to confirm and so forth. But you can see areas where AI is going to creep in more than others because it's a natural fit, that it already speaks the native language. So if you work in one of those areas, you're going to see AI a little bit more in an adversarial nature than someone who sees it more as a tool that's just going to make their life better.
Thank you. Michael, what about you? Any thoughts on the future and kind of where things are trending, especially as it relates to intellectual property and AI?
I think ultimately AI is going to drive us back to data. I think right now the conversation around AI is sort of a competitive advantage. Do you have it? Do you not have it? How are you doing what you do better? Well, like all innovations in technology, at some point that will become ubiquitous, and it's going to level out the playing field. Everybody will be using AI in their relative spaces, and so the competitive advantage of AI will go away. And this is not a short-term thing. This is, a decade, 2 decades. But I think what it does to me go back to is the value of the data that drives AI. That's where you'll still get competitive advantage. Because I think the economies will scale, right? The AI economy is going to be a much bigger economy because people are going to be more productive. We're going to be able to produce more things, learn more things, develop more things, create more things. And so eventually we're going to get out of this. I think we'll get out of this. Is it going to be net better, net worse? Is it going to take jobs, add jobs? And eventually the economy is just going to grow around the innovation, like every single innovation before. I can't think of a single one where that hasn't played out. What that economy looks like, I think the interesting part for me from an IP perspective, my head really goes to the IoT of things, because right now AI is largely talked about in a data information creation, image generation sort of conversation. But I'm interested in the world where AI is actually connecting thingies to other thingies, and so
I quote you on that one.
Yeah, so I'm ordering pizza through a non-handheld device, and that is getting sent to Domino's. And there's an automated car there, and there's an automated kitchen that's producing this. And I'm thinking, like, what does that world look like? And so as we think about the risks and the IP gains and losses of AI right now, start plugging the physical things into that. And then I think lawyers are really going to have a heyday at that point, trying to figure that out. But it's exciting. But I tend to just step beyond this isn't great, this is great. And it's like, it's just going to become the economy that we're in. And so how do we adjust to that? And what are the skills people need to level up into that? I think IP is still going to be IP. I think it's going to be important till the end of time, because that's why people create. It provides the incentive. And I don't know, like there was Musk and Dorsey came out and said, hey, let's just get rid of IP. It's something that you would expect to come from Musk, right? That would be a statement that he would say. But on the other hand, it's like it's been the bedrock of innovation, because to know that you have proprietary rights to something you've put your sweat into has always provided the bedrock of growth and technology innovation in this country. And so I don't think you can just get rid of that. I think it's going to have to change. And I think Brooke brought up some really interesting points of how that might work. But I think that's going to be the challenge that we have, is like, how does ownership look like in an AI age? And so there's a lot of fingers. You could do 5 podcasts on that and still barely just scratch the surface on that, for sure.
Yeah. If I can jump in on that Musk, Dorsey point. It's not clear at all, like what type of intellectual property they were talking about when they said that. Did they mean copyrights? Did they mean patents? Did they mean, trade secrets or trademark law? I think the most clear line you can draw is to copyright, because that's where a lot of these AI companies have current lawsuits against them. And we talked about that earlier, and it looks like they may be winning the day. They don't have to delete copyright. They can just rely on fair use, transformative use arguments. With relation to patents, Musk has said in the past, I think the quote was something like, patents are for the weak. And in a way, he's not wrong. In a way, one of the things that we tout about patents is that they level the playing field so that the small, nimble company doesn't just get run over by the big giant company.
Who has more resources.
Yeah, who has more resources. They can get a product to market faster, but they didn't have the innovation. So I don't think saying that patents for the weak means that they don't have their value. I think, what's the old software term? That's a feature, not a bug. So I think that's kind of what we're designed to do. I do think, though, that that some patents are going to really benefit bigger companies. Think of like, some of the big pharmaceuticals like Eli Lilly or someone like that. When you get an idea about a new area of technology, there's all these different, species that are potential ways that your products could go. And it takes so much data and so much research to run down all those little bunny trails to find the one that actually pays off. And if they can have AI do that for them in a fraction of the time, we may see it's much easier to get a new, a new pharmaceutical product to market because they don't have far less wasted research. One of the big, discoveries in AI that's caught a lot of ears was the protein folding. Figuring out how proteins are going to fold and what effect that's going to have is one big intellectual and computational challenge. And there was a AI program, and this isn't my exact area of expertise, so I won't go into too much detail, but basically they were looking at some of the initial foldings and then determining what the rest of the protein foldings were going to look like based on that first little snippet. And the AI was able to do that better than anyone had ever done before. So I think some of those data intensive things may really benefit some big companies, and it's not necessarily something that's going to be, only helping the small people.
But and I think the policies are meant to drive the flow of money, right?
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, the solution to that was you count up the number of startups that got bought by larger companies because they were the innovative shops. Now you could say AI is going to level that out, and so even large companies are going to be able to be scrappier and more innovative through that technology. But at the end of the day, I think you can be sure that the policy is going to reinforce economic flow. And so any policy that stymies that, I don't think is going to be favored amongst courts or politicians or the public. And so I think the incentives will be to create the framework or redesign the framework so it continues to make money flow through that innovation pipeline. And larger companies will, I think, continue to buy up smaller companies. But again, that's why my head goes back. It's just going to grow the entire pot. I don't see anything in place where it's going to create a turf war over the haves and the have-nots. I think it's just going to grow. It's just going to create a larger thing of what we have between large companies and small companies. So that's why I think we agree, Brooke. I think patent law is going to stay in place. It may change in terms of how you may adjust the time for patent protection to reduce that, whatever that takes. But I think those will be the tweaks that people will be making over the next couple of decades.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Yeah, I think
more efficient, more output. Like, I mean, if AI is an accelerator for the entire GDP per se, that's an interesting thought process that goes beyond just, individuals and how it could prosper everyone involved. We know adaptation and change are hard. But is this an accelerator for the entire, economy at large because of those virtues? That's really interesting.
And think about the timing, right, guys? Because I think you look at the population, the census studies, and the demographic studies, and we're going into an era of net population decline, right? And it's happening. We're on the cusp of it here in the U.S. It's already happening in Europe. I think the only place that's not happening is sub-Saharan Africa, maybe Southern Latin America. But how else is our economy going to grow? Jeff, you brought up GDP. Like, how else is that going to happen? It's not apparently going to happen through adding more bodies to the planet. Right. It's going to have to happen through productivity. And so so on one hand, the people who are kind of freaking out about AI and autonomy, they're like, well, you ought to also think about your economy, because otherwise that economy is just going to shrink, and that doesn't ever feel great on any country. So
yeah, I was listening to an economic speech a few months back, and they were talking about the economy and how we can grow the economy and how we can decrease the country debt and so forth. And one of the answers that was coming up was increase of productivity via AI. So it's definitely you put your finger on the pulse there, Michael.
Yeah, I mean these are long-term things, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So again, going back to the IP, Jeff, because I know that's the point of the discussion today. It's like the IP, the frameworks, the regulations, the laws. There's going to be pressures that are going to push them into a place to make this useful. I think the biggest risk is, like, let's not over-index to where we break things, but I do think the incentive is going to be to support it heavily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one thing
Makes sense.
you brought up earlier, Jeff, was the concept of AI as a black box. Um, I suspect that for a variety of reasons, we're going to see a move away from that into more supervised learning, more structured learning, and less completely unsupervised learning.
Mm-hmm.
That will make IP easier to patent when we can, kind of point to the logic along the way, it,
Right.
at least at certain midpoints. I also think that for a lot of other, ethical and socioeconomic reasons, people are going to want to have those answers because, people are going to ask questions about, why did you make this decision? And was this fair? And did you, take into account this issue or that issue? And if you've got a complete black box solution, they're not going to be able to answer those questions.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
so I think, and I think usually that's not at the detriment of the technology. You can put, flags in along the way that you're getting data of what came to those decisions. So I don't think it's an either or that you're destroying the technology by doing this, but I think you're getting some kernels along the way of how it got to that decision. And I think more and more when you get answers to AI things, whether it be through, a simple platform or something more complex, that you're going to get footnotes and you'll be able to, tag those footnotes and look and see what information was used to come to those answers. And that's just like we do in anything, when someone says something that you think is smart, you're like, oh, well, what's the background on that person? Let me make sure that they were actually someone whose advice I should be taking. Same thing with AI. When you get an answer, you're going to want to know where that came from.
It's going to have to be.
That's a good point. That we have been very kind of black box neural net sort of thing, but you can accomplish the same results just with math, right? And that's not quite black box. So the notion of going to more supervised or structured learning and putting in more flags and having more understanding down the road to help solve for some of the issues that are coming up in IP.
Yeah. Did you guys hear about the lawsuit from was it Workday? I think it's a Seattle-based company. They just got sued because they were running every resume through their AI, and apparently there wasn't a single person over 40 years old who actually got an interview from it. And as a 52-year-old, I was like, "Yikes, that hurts," right? You're kind of thinking, but to the point of the black box, it's not defensible. The reality is, if you're gonna let AI take, we talked a little bit earlier, Jeff, about kind of that persona. If you're gonna give rights to AI, you have to create obligations for AI, and that's always the way it's going to be. And so I think there's going to have to be a transparency, a defensibility to it for sure.
Yeah, you raised a really good point, Michael, on that. Not reading the resumes. The interesting counterbalance you get is AI makes it so much easier to send out resumes that you now get the company being flooded with resumes.
It's a circular reference.
Circular reference. I saw this one AI comic strip where
I didn't peg you as a defense lawyer, bro. So you may want to call up the Workday's counsel and let them know.
Yeah. There's this one cartoon where one person says AI is great. I just write one sentence and it turns it into a 10-page email. And then the other person says AI is great. I get this 10-page email and it turns into a one-line sentence.
Hey, that's where we're deferring to the AI on both sides. That's crazy. That's funny.
That is funny.
Two last questions for you guys before we wrap up. Appreciate the discussion so far. One is, you kind of touched on this, but ethics or principles, as it relates to IP that we need to get right as we design for the future. And this could be a message for the trademark office. But Brooke, any thoughts about kind of the ethics or principles we want to get right? As these legal frameworks evolve.
So, some of that I think is going to come down to, how, sort of the inventorship issues. How are you generating this technology? So, AI is a little bit analogous in some extent to how open source came into the software world. Like, before open source, people were coding pretty much everything they did, and then open source, arguably, it was much easier to use open source for a lot of things.
Right.
So a large percentage of it became open source. And then with AI, now you can take even more of your product and outsource it, so you're only creating a little bit. So there's going to be ethical reasons why people are going to want to use AI to do their job in a way that their company doesn't want them to. So that's just one of many examples how ethics issues are going to come into that. And then how that's going to roll into patents is, then when we're asking, are you the inventor of this? Did you produce this? In the same way that open source code can be problematic for a patent if you were not the sole inventor and you brought in another inventor who lots of open source platforms have anti patent components or open source license components to them. You can really damage your patent rights if you brought in open source code and not told your company about it. You may run into some similar issues if coders, due to time pressure, are using AI to help code platforms, and then the company wants to patent them, and then later down the line we find out in litigation that 80-90% of this code was not written by the employee and it was written by third party AI. Those are things that you could easily see people and not necessarily starting with malevolent intent, but just trying to keep up with the pressure and trying to use resources and not realizing or maybe realizing, and just that's what they got to do to survive, creating ethical problems for their company due to lack of ownership of the material that they're creating.
Right. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. Last question is, what advancements in AI, are you guys personally most excited for? And that could be related to your profession or otherwise, but Michael, start with you.
I'm interested to see AI start connecting things. Like I said, for I think a large percentage of people, AI feels just like a really enhanced Google search engine. And most people aren't scratching the surface, even with all AI shortfalls. Like most people aren't even scratching the surface of what its actual capability is right now. But when it starts connecting physical devices, so not just it taking inputs from us, but actually sensing and responding, that to me is probably the most exciting part. And I think that's going to help not just my job. That's really going to transform industries and worlds, I think, at that point.
The robotic side, the machine side, where machines are truly intelligent, and you can put intelligence on top of any physical object. This is where things truly become smart. I'm really excited for that future as well. And I think a lot of people don't recognize how fast that's moving.
Yeah.
Brooke, what about you? For the future, what are some of the AI advancements you're most excited for?
Yeah. So, right now, we're training AI to answer things, but usually it's a fairly narrow task that we're looking for. And so when that can start, moving towards what some people are calling, general AI, where you're going to be able to get this broad swath, that's going to be really interesting in the broad sense. In a really practical sense, AI is providing some really useful tools to quickly be able to determine what the current level of technology, so we can see really clearly when we've got a client that's done something new. Sometimes there's so much information in the world that it's like, okay, is this really new, or has someone done this before? When we can quickly establish the status quo of a particular technology so that we can quickly discern what our client has done this new, that is super useful. I think you're also going to see some really personal versions of AI that can act to a certain degree like your executive assistant or something like that can know all of your day-to-day activities and what you normally do and what you for work and for physical activities and for health and can add to hey, you forgot to do this today, hey, have you thought about this, that can really optimize your life, both the work aspects of it and the non-work aspects of it.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Michael. It's great having you here, hearing your insights, your wisdom as leaders and kind of influencers in this space, and encourage any of the listeners, if they want to double click or they have a unique situation, to reach out. But thanks again for being on the show.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
The Future of Podcasts is brought to you by Fresh Consulting. To find out more about how we pair design and technology together to shape the future, visit us at freshconsulting.com. Make sure to search for The Future of in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And on behalf of our team here at Fresh, thank you for listening.